Welcome everyone to the world building panel. We have Erin and Heidi and Mary and Renelle and Tracy here, and I'm very excited. I like world building. I'm a fantasy fan. And when I was in high school, I took linguistics class just because I knew that I was going to have to do a final project, and so I used that as an excuse to make a language for one of my worlds.
There you go.
So that's where I'm coming from. How about you, Erin?
I absolutely loved The Lord of the Rings. I fell in love with it when I was a senior in high school, and just being able to be in that fantastical realm, to be able to be in a new world with new creatures, with new people, with new languages, with new settings and places. It was magical, and you felt like a little kid in a candy shop. I mean, it was so different, it was so unique, and it was just really amazing, and that's what made me fall in love with world building. I was like, wow, I really want to do that.
What about you, Heidi?
Well, I actually grew up reading fantasy, so the whole concept of world building, I come from a fantasy geek family, so it was kind of ingrained in me from an early age, and I never really noticed it until I started reading science fiction. And that's where I got really excited, and then I started seeing all of the nuances in fantasy that I hadn't realized before because it had always been a part of my life. And then I would love to write fantasy and science fiction, but I cheat and write urban fantasy so that half of the world building is done for me.
How about you, Mary?
Oh, me? Okay, well, as far as world building, I always had very vivid dreams when I was growing up and began to write what I was dreaming about down, and sometimes they related to things I saw every day. Other times they didn't. And then I've always liked history. So it kind of, I started writing things that were like historical fantasy, part real and part fantastic. I guess in a way like steampunk, but not steampunk. In other words, you can put it in any era you want without the tech. And some of it will be historically accurate, some of it won't. But that's just the way I've always written.
How about you, Renelle?
Me, I started with fantasy books as well. My two favorite series was Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time and Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and those are what I consider two of the best world-building examples in fantasy. The depths of the worlds that both of those authors created were phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So, yeah, and to go through Wheel of Time was 13/14 books, and I mean books.
Yeah.
And Terry Pratchett, obviously, I think it was about 40 at the end of the day, and it was just amazing how the world never became boring. It never became, it was just always, there's always something new to discover, and to try and do that in the books that you're writing it takes a lot of skill, and I think every author is still always learning how to do it. So wherever we can get tips on how to do it better, that's where I'm at.
How about you, Tracy?
I was never that enamored of Tolkien when I was at high school. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I think the first fantasy series that I loved would probably be The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen Donaldson. So a little bit darker, but still, has a lot to... He can attribute a lot of his writing to Tolkien, and then Julian May's Pliocene saga, The Exiles. So yeah, but a little bit darker stuff.
Yeah.
And when I do world building, I take my love of history, cherry pick the bits I like. Often from, if I have two different cultural groups, I'll pick history from different cultural groups, and religion, study all sorts of world religion and just combine them into amalgam of my own. But that then gives me a ring of authenticity.
Hi, Angela.
Hi. I am
Hi.
sorry I am late.
Okay.
I'm still like hopping to different events and organizing some stuff. I'm actually wrapping up Cover Wars now, and then I was on something else, so I'm here now. So
world building.
world building.
So I forgot to tell everyone to do this. So everyone go around and say where you are from, like where you are right now.
Do you want to start at the beginning with Erin?
Sure.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm in the U.S., specifically the Midwest. Yay! Where there's lots of snow.
Hi, Erin. I'm Heidi, and I am in Salt Lake City, so we just got rid of the snow.
Probably came our way.
Mary?
I'm in Euclid, Ohio. That's a little suburb outside of Cleveland, Ohio. We just were surprised by 6 inches of snow.
Renelle?
Hi, I'm Renal van Tonder. I'm from South Africa. I've never seen snow, so it sounds like fun.
It
I
is
stay in
until about the
Johannesburg.
6th month.
Tracy?
I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and we don't get snow in Melbourne either, thankfully.
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area of California in the U.S. So
And how is the snow?
there is no snow, but we are getting rain, so I hope it stays light and doesn't start raining really hard because I have a skylight.
Mhm.
That could be really noisy. Thank God.
I am Angela B. Chrysler. I am in from New York in the mountains. It was snowing, it was sticking, it looked like a storm, and then it stopped, and now it's sunny out.
Nice.
Welcome to New York.
I just thought we should all mention, where we are because it's world building and we're from everywhere in the world.
That's just amazing. Africa, South Africa, Renal?
Yes, that's right.
That's amazing. I didn't even realize we had somebody from South Africa. Welcome.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. It's
I
my
love
first panel,
culture.
so I'm nervous.
I am absolutely a culture nut and love different countries. So I am like, ooh, any place and every place is better than where I am. But I can't leave where I am because I love it too much. So it's kind of like I want to be everywhere and here at the same time. So that's
Time travel.
Right?
yeah.
You need Hermione's little necklace.
Yep.
So how about we talk about how important exploring culture is for world building. I know, Tracy, you mentioned this a little bit, but how about everyone else? What cultures inspire you as you're building worlds?
That's something I would love to know. Where does everybody write as far as what culture, what time period do we have here? What genres?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start if that's all right.
Yeah.
I write urban fantasy and paranormal fantasy, so I cheat and keep it kind of modern. But I do take the perspective of my protagonists. They're all Native American, and not necessarily having grown up on the reservation, but they still have ties to their Native American roots. And I've tried to make them from different tribes so that I can do research about those tribes and their traditions and share those aspects, because I feel like media tends to, if there's a Native American, they get slapped as Cherokee, and then they just do generic histories. And so being able to delve into more detail, my character Havoc is Ojibwe, which is really fun because I learned that I should not put the language in my books because I can't pronounce any of the words. So take the language out.
New York, we do that all here. Tiaf, Neoga, and Onondaga. Most of New York State is made up of the names from the Oneida Iroquois clans.
Right.
So we hear a lot of Schenectady around here. Great. And then
What about everyone else?
Um, who goes first?
yeah.
Well, I guess I could go. I think I try to get a variety of cultures that I look into when I write my fantasy. It's more like high fantasy. What I like to do is I like to take a lot of examples from historical cultures, so like maybe ancient Roman, for example, and I like to pick little pieces here and there from the different cultures that I study and create my own culture. So with my series, The Ripple Affair, it's a made up world, it's a made up culture, and when you look at, for example, the Hugelians in my series, they've got a little bit of a nomadic tribe culture. They've got a little bit of a European culture. They've got a little bits and pieces here from actual cultures, and it's just kind of meshed into a melting pot, for example. So what I like to do is I like to take little bits and pieces from just anything and everything that I hear from history, or even just whatever pops in my head, and then I kind of create my own culture from scratch from that. So that's always fun.
Yeah. So welcome, Massimo.
Hello,
Oh,
Massimo.
Hello.
hey, hi there. Oh boy,
So
I'm the only
introduce
one
yourself
among.
and tell us all where you're from.
I'm calling from
Because,
France, actually.
well, okay, you're from France and you're in Switzerland right now?
It's not, I'm in France as well, but very, very close to the Switzerland border.
Okay.
Like from my house, everything I see outwardly is Switzerland, although I'm in France. That's how close I am.
Awesome. I like how international this world building panel is. That
Yeah.
makes me happy.
Yeah.
Wow,
Mhm.
it's a world building. You cannot be just one single nation.
Exactly. You have to build the whole world and not just a part of it, right? So we're
By
talking
the
about
way,
this.
sorry for being late.
Oh, no, it's okay. We're talking about how we draw inspiration from real cultures in order to make the cultures in our worlds, and which particular cultures inspire us for particular things. So I draw a lot of my inspiration from the cultures I come across. I love to travel, and as I travel, I like see things, and I meet people, and that's sort of where I get the original curiosity, and then I want to know more, and then I use that. Um, so that's where I'm coming from with this. Uh, okay, we still have Renelle and Tracy and Mary and Massimo to talk about this.
Okay.
So,
Well, oh, do you want to go first, Mary? Tracy?
No, I just wanted someone else to go first.
Okay. I'll do that, no problem. Well, I'm from South Africa, so for me, a lot of the books that I read, they tend to be set in America. And I've lost video feed. Oh, there we go. There it's back. Okay. So, yeah, I like to put a South African flavor in all my books, but I write sci-fi, so I have the added advantage that I can tweak it whatever way I want. I, extrapolate from what's happening today into the future. So, but I do like to keep it South African. I do like to have these little phrases and things happening where if a South African person was to read my books, then they would, they'd be like, oh, that's what a South African would do, or that's how South Africans act, or something like that. So for the moment, I'm basically using my local area and, like I said, extrapolating that into the future.
awesome.
But that should give it a unique voice, so that should work really well.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
How about you, Tracy?
Me?
Me.
Tracy.
For the current series I'm writing, The Chronicles of Altaica, I have been influenced by the Ottomans, Moguls, the Mongols, and the Romans. all sort of mixed in together. Done a lot of research into primitive literatures. It's really early, sorry. Primitive religions. Kind of got if you looked in time period, some of the weapons probably from the 1300s, but I've mixed up all sorts of stuff. So you've got like a clan-based system in one country. I use, when I'm talking about names, even down to names and things like that, I actually pick different cultures' names. I love using the Oxford Dictionary of First Names because it has a section at the back that is broken up into cultures and countries. So you can actually do something so simple as just picking all one group's names from a particular region or nationality and all another group's names, and it all helps to create the differences within your book and give it a sense of realism.
Yeah. Have you heard of Behind the Name?
No.
You're gonna love it. It's a list of names, and you
Website?
can categorize it by usage, by where that name comes from, like what culture it comes from, by gender,
And time period?
and time period. Like they have ancient names, they have modern names. It's the best thing ever. I use it all the time to do exactly that, to find names for the
I must admit, it would be nice to find a website like that, but I'm fairly dubious about most things that you find on the web.
Yeah, you do have to be careful.
Yeah, if I could check the credentials of stuff and things, that would be good, but it'd certainly be useful.
Yeah. So, Massimo.
Well, glad that you are calling me at this point because looks like you've been focusing on human cultures and civilizations, both in the past and in the present, in order to extrapolate. But this is not the only source of inspiration in order to create a fantasy or a science fiction culture in a distant planet. Think, for example, of Ender's Game from Orson Scott's card. Essentially, the aliens that he created are being mapped, if you want, into insects' behavior, society of hives, and how they do react to invasions from or from threats from the environment or from other species. So everything and anything that shows some social behavior can be used in order to transpose into an external civilization, especially in science fiction and fantasy, because we are definitely not constrained to try to reproduce what happens in our planet. And this gives us quite a lot of freedom in terms of interpretation, but also in terms of creating situations where a society that might be close to a human one can be confronted to situations that are literally out of this world.
Yeah.
Another point that I think, but this comes because of my scientific background, is that when you create a world, is the creation of the world and also the society that populate that world also is depending on the environment that you are describing and creating, which means that you have to have a clear picture of what could be the laws of physics and biology and chemistry that happen in the world that you are constructing, because it will pretty much affect the evolution and the kind of species, sentient or non-sentient, kind of animals, etc., that will populate the world that you are then using in your stories. And also remember that the world or the environment is pretty much a character. So out of some of the details and some of the aspects that make up the world, there could be twists, plots, situations, crises, and conflicts, as with any other character.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That was one of the things that I loved about the Paralandra series by C.S. Lewis, was that he did so much detail in how the world shaped the creatures that lived in the world. That was actually where I first recognized the concept of world building as being significant.
Right. Have you come across a book? It's a classic, but it's World Building by Ben Botha.
No, I haven't.
Okay, is essentially is a collection of articles on the um, physiology, physics aspect, chemistry aspect, etc., of the world building goal that authors in science fiction and in fantasy needs to have, and essentially opens up in a way that is accessible to non-scientists to what are the rules, the laws of nature, the shape of the world. It means how they will shape your environment, and thus how the population or the civilization that you are using in your books will react and will evolve. And this is pretty much, let's say, a compendium of information that will tell you, for example, if the world that you are creating is believable or can actually sustain life. And if it can, and it has different characteristics, in which way life can evolve in that particular world. And for the discerning readers, this is also what makes the difference between an author who cares and does research or an author who simply have wild ideas and put them on paper.
Yeah. So we have a question, and the question is, what society aspects do you start with? So setting, culture, characters, mythology, that sort of thing. Like, which piece of the world building do you start with?
Who goes first?
For me, it just depends on the story that I'm working on, and how the story comes to me. And that aspect determines where I start with the development of the world, and then as one piece builds onto another piece, and then all of a sudden I've got this unique world that I'm building in.
Yeah. That's similar for me. I usually get the story usually comes to me almost as a movie in my head. So I'm sort of seeing one piece of the world because I have this one piece of story that's pictures. And then I have to find out and sort of be an explorer and go find out what's going on in the rest of the world and why and all of that. So.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in here to answer that question. And as far as what I write, which worlds, actually I became a writer because of the extensive history that I researched from primordial early civilizations with man, pre-Roman and Mesopotamia, all the way up to actually 1776, once we broke off from Europe. I started off with Rome, and I wanted to know how Christianity shaped and evolved the way it did. And you can't study that without studying Rome, and you can't study that without researching history. So I'm a Romanologist. Medieval is my forte. And the books that I write, my fantasy series specifically, revolves around Norse mythology and Scandinavia. And this is where I kind of ran into a lot of pickles, because the Vikings, when they went Viking, they went everywhere. So there is Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian influence. There is the German Ottoman Empire influence, and above all else, there is Irish influence. So I covered all of that and brought it into this massive culture. And the primary is Scandinavia, 10th century, about 100 years prior to the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So to answer the question, where did I start? I started with the climate, the weather. Once I decided that with Kala, and once I decided that I wanted her to be an elf, I researched where elves originated from in myth, and that took me to Scandinavia. And the first thing I looked from there was the climate, the weather, because their world, and this is true of almost every location, is the geography, is what will shape the land, their way of life, everything, whether they farm, whether they fish, everything is determined by what the weather is. In Asia, in China, there's the rice farms because of the weather, because of the monsoon season. We are farmers here in New York State because of the surplus of land that we have as far as the space. There are cattle ranchers in the Middle East, Central America, because of the plains that they have. I then looked at the flora and the fauna and the food that they ate. So it really, and again, that's all a reflection of the climate and the weather, what kind of daylight they had. For me, that really brought in what kind of war, what kind of everything took place, what their trade looked like, because I needed to know what their export-import looked like, and for the Vikings especially, why they branched out like they did was one of the hypotheses, the shortage of land, because of where they were located.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to go alongside with that, what Angela was saying too is when you look at the area that the culture is originating from, I think that really does influence them. I know with my series, with the land that they live in, for example, the Reiku in my series, they are surrounded by tundra. They're surrounded by snow and ice, and so just like you were saying, the weather. How does that affect them?
Yeah.
How does that affect how they live their daily lives? How do they get food? How do they get farming is not exactly going to be an easy thing. So how else can they get their food? Well, they may have to get it by other means. I think the area that they're surrounded by, that really does help provide some good building blocks to start building that world. It's kind of the land is the base in which you build the world from.
Yeah.
And this is related also to what we were saying before, that the world that you are building and describing, it helps shaping the stories out, and also creating the motivations why certain characters are setting them up in order to then interact with the story. The world and the various aspects that are described in the story pretty much become this scenario in which the story, that particular story, can happen. It can happen exactly because that world is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back also to what Heidi was saying, is depending pretty much on the story. Look, for example, at various dystopian stories that we have seen. Usually, the society that is described is also pretty much in line with also the natural aspect of the world. It's gloomy, the resources are gone. Certainly, you're not going to create a dystopian society and the world is fantastic and apple trees everywhere. Why? Because it would create a dissonance with what you are trying to recreate, and the character that your main protagonist is forging comes out also because of the history that he has. We get into a story and we start with something that happens and that brings the characters into their storyline, but we need always to remember that before that moment, our man or woman been spending 20 years in that world, 30 years, 15 years. So how and why he has become or she has become that particular character that is using our story to show the readers what happens. And this is something that you have to keep in mind all the time when you think about the story. The world is not just a background scenario. That would really be reductive and eliminate quite an important part of the immersion of the story and the suspension of disbelief for the readers. Boy, you are all silent.
Yeah. I don't know. I like thinking about these things, and then I'm not here, and I'm in my world instead.
I think none of us want to interrupt the other, right? Too. So, yeah.
Yeah. If you have something to say, just start talking.
I am here. I'm multitasking.
I know.
I feel bad because I have to do things over here, and I really want to. Okay, the reason why I jumped into this particular panel, of all the panels, this one was the most that I was absolutely passionate about. I was talking about this earlier in a discussion with Joe on live coverage. With world building, there was definitely a process to it, and I'm very curious to see if anyone else had this experience. It took me 7 years to write Dollar and Shadow, and of those 7 years, I rewrote the book 5 times. And it's absolutely because of the world building's fault. It's 100%. It was giving me a problem. When I was done with the first section, it was terrible, and I obviously needed to rewrite it. But I couldn't see the scenery. I couldn't see the setting. So I researched it and started getting into Norway and the fjords, the lifestyle there, and rewrote it. I still didn't like the setting. It was still shallow. So I rewrote it again. I did more research. And I realized how the culture spans and how it influenced. And one of the hardest things with the culture that I was working with is everything that, and I'm not sure if this is true of South Africa, but in Western culture and European culture, everything about us came from the Romans. Our language, our way of life, our habits, there's so much that revolves around Rome, so much influence, right down to our calendar, our clock. There's just so much there. Our language, and with the Vikings, with the Scandinavian Norsemen, they evolved for centuries without any Roman influence. So I started off going, okay, what about the language? The language, they had their own Eldar Futhark. While they had the Latin alphabet and the Greek over here, I had another language that I had to work with, one that's actually dead and no longer around. In addition to that, they also had, this was one of the most fascinating to me, it was very common, and it still is, for Norsemen to drink blood. Whenever you kill a reindeer, it was honorable, very healthy, to drink reindeer blood. I got into that research and how they do it and what it tastes like. It was, and over on that conversation regarding certain religions, it was absolutely sacrilegious. You do not drink anything like that. And there was definitely a clash there. In addition to the calendars, they had moon calendars, whereas there was the Julian calendar. It was very, very different. And the more I got into this, the more I realized just how much there was an influence coming from all over. And I finally got to a point in my research where I said, really, what do we know about the past? And when I thought about it, we can tell you what wars took place. We can tell you which departments of what takes place. We can just break all this down. And one of the things that just absolutely floored me was it's basically a newspaper. So one of the things that I did to shape the world that I was putting together was I wrote a newspaper from 10th century Norway. And how that would look. We would talk about the marriages, the war, the politics. We would talk about the climate, the weather, new recipes that came out. And that is how I built the world that I used. And was the newspaper. So I'm curious how your experience was in building your worlds, what process you used.
I think I had a similar sort of evolution. So the story that I haven't written yet because I want my writing to be as good as it can be because it's my favorite story.
Mm-hmm.
The world building for that, I've been doing it in my head, in my imagination, for 14 years now.
Yeah.
Since when I first came up with it, and I wrote a lot of drafts
Mm-hmm.
with the first version of it. And it's funny to go back and reread them because everything is wrong and everything's changed, but the writing is way better than I thought it would be. So it taught me how to write okay,
Yeah.
even though the story has completely shifted. But that's, as I was saying at the very beginning, I intentionally took an elective in high school about linguistics because I was curious and I wanted to make this language actually feel like a real language and not just some words I made up. So I actually have a dictionary and I have a grammar and I have words that are irregular and words that are regular and I had to explain why. And I used this class as an excuse to do all of this work because I knew that my professor was a Tolkien fan and that he would understand. So, yeah. Yeah. But that world still isn't ready. It still isn't ready for me to write the story yet.
Yeah.
You think it ever will be?
It will be. It's very close. The plot of the story hasn't changed in 5 years. There are still a lot of things where I just don't know. Like,
But
they
I don't
have
know whether you, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I don't know whether we ever get to a point where we think it's perfect, and at some point you do need to stop tinkering.
Yeah.
And
So for
put it
me,
out there.
it's there are pieces that I don't know about that I need to in order to make the story make sense outside of my own head. They have this. It's a fantasy world, but they have this ability to transfer to any universe, and they do this on a somewhat regular basis. And some of them come to our real world. And so I need to be able to understand which people went to which parts of the real world and which times, because that influences their culture in this fantasy world.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, there's this one scene that's...
You almost need to do a flow chart.
I do. I already have a million flowcharts of, like, family trees for that, too. But, like, there's this one character, and his name is Ilian. And the three girls are like, that's the weirdest name ever. Why do you have that name? He's like, it's a normal name. It's a French name. Like, what? Because to him, France is a place that people go.
Yeah.
But they're, they don't know that until that conversation.
In my case, it's been the other way around. I had to think in terms of world building only when I got to the third book of my trilogy. This is the one that has been published by Booktrope in the last 2-3 years. And the first and the second book, they take place on Earth. It is only on the third one where the humans get the time to have their revenge. But the way I was saying I got the other way around is because in the trilogy, the humans face a different alien civilization. So in the third book, essentially what I had as a dilemma was to create the world that were justifying the aliens that I introduced in the first two books. So it was as an aftermath. Because I showed that particular kind of aliens with that particular kind of traits, what would have been the world they were living in. And if I was also to discovering and describing their world in a particular way, where their world larger, smaller than Earth, did they have a moon, the kind of star that were orbiting around it, all justifying the characters and the traits and the way the aliens that I had portrayed in the first two books came out in the stories. But in a sense, this is also what you want to do starting from the world. If you want to, especially in science fiction, you want to map the world and the sentient species that will inhabit the world. The two things need to coexist together. So you need to create an ensemble that is really believable and plausible. Otherwise, again, I believe the science fiction is a science fiction story if it is extremely rigorous from the point of view of not only the world construction, but also the laws and the physics that is there, the scientific element in the story. That has to be rigorous. Otherwise, the most important readers that you can have are those who could speak well about your stories will do not, because they will find those flaws, those weaknesses that will turn you not into a science fiction author, but into someone who doesn't really know what he's writing about.
Science fiction fans get very, very cranky when the science is implausible.
Oh, yes. And that is a topic I think you guys will be touching down on
the
science fiction.
lot on the science fiction panel.
Oh, yeah.
We have a lot of scientists and engineers who are going to be on that panel, so it'll be a fun discussion.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm afraid to write science fiction.
You do.
I love reading it, but I'm not ready to write it.
Now, my husband
I'm sorry,
is...
did you say scientists?
Yeah.
Could I apply to that panel, maybe?
my
Well,
my
I'm
husband
gonna
is
be
in.
there. I'm gonna be there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think my husband will be joining you on that, Massimo. He is an organic
Okay.
chemist with a background in physics,
Yeah, well,
and
and
he is
I'm
an
a
avid.
biomedical engineer and a mechanical
Yeah,
engineer.
yes, and I wrote, even with my fantasy, I talked about metallurgy, and he was not okay with that. I'm like, it's a fantasy. He goes, no, no. If you're going to use tungsten, you're going to do it correct. This is the melting point. This is how. And I'm fine.
Absolutely.
I want it to be accurate, even though it's a fantasy. And that was one of the challenges that I had was, where do you draw that line between fantasy world building and reality? And I also had the historian in me going, I want this to be historically accurate. So what I ended up doing was I had this massive line of history that was dead on, and I wanted it to be so dead on that people could come in and actually use it as a textbook to learn the age. And
Mhm.
I'm very, very proud of the volume of this. So I have this history line that's there, and I've got my fantasy line that's here that's bouncing off of it. And then I've got the Norse historical mythology facts. And in the middle of
Mhm.
all of this, I've got my husband weaving this massive, okay, this has to be logical, this has to be scientifically probable. And it got to the
Absolutely.
point, yes, it got to the point where we decided it would be best if I not talk about tungsten and if we change the name over to just a fictitious metal. So it's actually tungsten, and to me it is, but we call it
Mhm.
Elving metal. So
Right.
I have that flexibility. It is a very, very serious topic when it comes to scientists. You don't mess with the
Yeah,
sun. And
I
Oh yeah,
for
definitely.
for
yeah.
my uh, new book that's like out almost out now. Um, the convention and all of the work with the convention has been disrupting my publication schedule.
Mine too. Yes, yes.
But for Necromancer, the bad guy uses dragon blood to tattoo his like marks on people because his magic is more powerful that way. And so I had to go through and be like, okay, this is the size of one of these dragons, and what animals are that size, and how can I calculate what their blood volume is? Because this
Yes.
bad guy is smart enough to know that he needs to keep the dragon alive,
Yeah.
and not take too much because he will lose his source of his magical power like booster
Mhm.
if the dragon dies. So
But
that was a fun random thing that I did.
this is a
Yeah.
good point that you were raising because fantasy novels are not novels that are based on fantasy in the sense that baseless. There is no reality in that, that there are no rules or that anything can happen. Not at all. Even when you create a fantasy novel and a world and characters and different civilization, etc., you are creating quite infrastructure, a
Hmm.
skeleton that
Yeah.
will need to be obeyed
Yeah.
throughout the entire story. Just because you say I'm writing fantasy doesn't mean that you can have Deus ex machina everywhere, or that you can throw out just an impossible to happen in that particular world of fantasy, coming out with a I don't know, a atmospheric event that does not fit that particular world, or a change in the temperature that does not fit in the environment that you are creating. There are pretty much rules that you are establishing because you have to create an ecosystem that is really consistent
Yeah.
from page one to the last page. It doesn't matter if it is fantasy, it doesn't matter if it is science fiction, it doesn't matter if it is a historical novel. Story needs to be consistent. You are creating a universe, and the reader has to forget he is reading.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
He
It has to
needs
feel
to have,
believable.
right, he needs to have that immersion in that world, and there should be nothing that contradicts what he has been experiencing before. As soon as
Yeah.
you do that, boom, you've lost your reader
Yes.
because you're
Yes.
not being
And
consistent, you're not being plausible.
and just like we were talking about, you were talking about it operating under rules and the science in your science fiction needing to be plausible. Fantasy readers at conventions also get very annoyed if the magic systems don't have
Oh
rules
yeah.
that they adhere to. They hate
Absolutely.
pulling a fast one with the magic just to get yourself out of a plot dilemma that you've put yourself in. It's all got to adhere to rules, even down to that, which the uninitiated would think should have no rules, but even that does.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
when writing a fantasy world where the magic doesn't have rules, that's the rule. And you have to make it clear that it's unpredictable like that.
Yeah.
You can't just
That would be
randomly
amazing.
feel like
You
it
just
has
inspired
rules.
a new idea. A fantasy world where the magic is unpredictable and we don't understand what it's going to do next. I'm writing it down. That's awesome.
But that is the rule, right? Like
Yeah,
it has to be
unpredictable.
consistent.
And that's not going to be good. I mean, that's
No,
oh,
that's
beautiful.
not
That's
messy.
like a man versus nature. Just a minute. Unpredictable magic.
I think it's one thing that we're talking about all the things we need to do to make the world real in terms of its culture, its language, religion, climate, geography, all that sort of thing. But the one thing that we haven't talked about is that we can make this world as beautiful as we like, but unless we put real three-dimensional characters within it, our world building will absolutely collapse.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've seen that be a problem with some video games. My husband is huge into gaming, and when Skyrim first came out, everybody was all about the beauty
Huge
of the
fan.
world. Yeah, yeah. I can't remember what the last one was, but the last one, a lot of people were really upset, my husband included, because they dropped the ball on the story because they were just focusing on the world. And he's like,
Yeah.
really? You guys just got really lazy. Like, they keep using the same kings for different countries,
Yeah.
and you know what I'm talking about, right?
No,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's
The
so
graphics is
frustrating.
gorgeous, and that is
And
it's
fun
boring.
as a
It does.
sandbox, but
Yeah.
then when you go and find all these cool Easter eggs and they're basically repeats of the same information with a little bit of change here,
Yeah.
it's like, really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like they actually fixed it with a legendary pack because of that flaw. Because they had let's really go all out, guys, on the CGIs, and they phenomenal graphics job. But you're right, the story fell flat. So after
And
a couple
unfortunately,
years,
they lost a lot of people and didn't get them back even
they
with
had
that
to
pack.
they had to recoup their losses with a legendary, and you're right, I don't think it did, because it was the same stuff. They plugged it in, and it was exciting and new all over again. But at the end of the day, there was no story. They did not expand on that story or the characters. So you're sitting there going, okay, well, the world is bigger and better, and I can do more stuff, but there still is no story. And they did fix it with ESO. That's Elder Scrolls Online at the PS4. They did fix it. They did fix it.
Which
They
left
had
out
to.
all of their computer people.
Oh yeah,
So,
no, they pulled out the stops. But yes, I absolutely saw what they did. And yeah, the story fell flat.
and they lost a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your characters that make your world work, and the way your characters respond and interact with that world and each other is what puts the final icing on the cake to make it real.
Yeah, absolutely. Because and we mentioned this a few times already, but like the setting and the climate and the culture and the economics and the politics all combine to influence that character as they grow up, which influences them. Go ahead.
Oh, I also love to use characters to introduce the world to readers instead of just, the 5-paragraph intro on chapter 1 where you're describing rolling hills and stuff. You rather have your characters do it from their point of view, and that's another way that you can also have, see the story through your character's eyes. I love doing that. I find it's the best way to tell people about a world.
Yeah. Yep. I love doing that. There's one moment in my book where they come upon a group of people, and these are strangers. They've invaded the land. They are absolutely taking it away from people. And if you don't adhere to their ways, they will slaughter you and your children and leave you to watch them die before they finish you off. And I have these elves who are looking at these people, and she sees the symbol on their chest, and she's like, "It's Nov," which is the Norwegian symbol for help. And it looks very similar to the word to an emergency symbol that we use today. And they're like, no, that's different. That's definitely something else. And for a while, they're sitting there evaluating it, and no one has caught on yet. I haven't gotten any feedback yet, but it's actually the elven Scandinavians looking in at the Christian religion as how it would have been in their point of view when it
I
came into
caught
the
that when
land.
I read it.
You did catch that, okay. And it was really, I had a couple other people who came back and they thought it was a fictitious thing that I had thrown in there. And I think if you know the history, I'm sorry? I hear something.
Yeah,
that
Millie.
might be me.
Love tech. So it was just, but absolutely, one of the things, Massimo, that you said regarding an author doing their job so well that you keep in the story. One of the things that I say,
Sorry.
sorry. One of the things that I say
Go ahead.
often, an author's job is to write so well that the reader forgets you are there as an author.
Mhm.
They completely forget there's even an author, and that is, to me, that is your goal. As any author, that is our goal. And I started with Kalan. I absolutely started with a character, and then I grabbed her culture, and then from there I built up this. Okay, well, what's around this culture? What would her point of view be? So, and then there was silence.
And then there was silence. This is what happens when you have world builders. Like, we all have worlds in our heads that we're, like, evaluating.
Yeah.
Whenever
Yeah.
there's silence, we're like, oh, I wonder what I've just learned about my world.
Did we lose someone?
I think we lost Mary. She's been coming in and out. Massimo, you're echoing. I don't know if you have,
The feedback.
yeah.
That's it. That's better.
Oh my goodness. The time has gone past very quickly.
Yeah.
So, what do you want to make a point to comment about before we run out of time completely?
I think to kind of go back a little bit on what you all said earlier, about the importance of character in making that setting really stand out. It's an interesting sort of trend, I think, and I don't know if you guys are noticing this because I'm a gamer, so I definitely know what you're talking about with the whole gaming aspect of everybody going with the CGI and kind of forgetting the story and the plot, but it almost seems like it's kind of happening everywhere in story, where not just in gaming, but maybe even in film and
Yeah.
television and even certain books too, where people concentrate so much on bringing this spectacular place, but they just leave the spectacle. That's all they have. They don't have any meat in the in the plate that they're offering. There's no
Jupiter Rising is
drama. There's just nothing there. It's just pretty pictures. That's all
It's
it
like-
is.
yeah,
But there's
exactly.
there's nothing to it. And so, I think our job as world builders is to hold on to what we have and bringing character and plot to that world, not just having it be a pretty picture, because if that pretty picture doesn't tell a story, well, are we really building a world or are we just painting a picture? There's really not much to it. So
Yeah.
One of the things that I took a perspective of when I was writing my worlds is at one point the magic system and the world, the setting, became characters. So I mean, very much. They really are. They have a personality. They absolutely are a moving and breathing character in my book. The land has a personality to it. So did the magic system. And so when I wrote the book, when I went through everything, I had these two characters with very much a personality of their own, and it was so much easier thinking of them as characters that I could just weave in and out of the story instead of thinking them as a magic system or a setting. And when I did that, the magic system suddenly, there were certain things about it that just suddenly came to life. Suddenly it became, I don't know the word, intelligence, sentient. It became sentient, and it really changed. It was just amazing.
I think it's interesting, almost like the lesson here is, if you want to build a world, build your character. Build your character, and the world will arrive.
Yes,
you will get that world through that character. So
very well said.
Thank you.
It's so true because when we go back to when you were saying how you develop your world from the beginning, for me it was the world started out as a wireframe, and from that wireframe the characters were introduced, and they discovered the world better than I could ever have imagined it. So I was
Yeah.
taking a back seat in the back of their minds while they went about their day-to-day business, and to me that was, it's as much a discovery for me as it was for my readers. So. And also, like I said, in that way, you can introduce the world without, info dumping, without forcing it on your readers, and also just more intimately, stuff that readers don't have to know, they'll never have to know. They just sort
Yeah.
of inference it from the way the characters handle the world.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when you do research for your novel, both in terms of creating the civilization of also the world building, most of it doesn't show on the pages because you're describing,
Very
but
true.
it is there. You feel it is there. But it
Pareto's
is.
rule, 80% mustn't be there. You only use 20%. I'm so sorry, I won't interrupt again.
Oh no, you're fine.
No.
Yeah, I often find myself asking questions not just about the character whose story I'm writing, but how did their parents end up how they were, and then I get information from the past and from where the parents are coming from, because that, to me, that shapes the character as well. It's not just the culture and setting, it's what culture and what setting were their parents growing up in, and how
Yeah.
does that generational sort of shifting happen.
Traditions, yeah.
And I end up I end up like building things backwards, so I'll start with the end of the series. And I'll find out, oh, I have like 5 stories when I thought I had 1.
I love writing books backwards.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely I love writing books backwards. You start with the end. So by the time you get to the beginning, you know exactly how you're going to start it. You know where everyone's going to end up. It's really, yeah. I'm not a pantster, though. I'm a plotter. I have, like, whiteboards. I have 5 whiteboards, and I'm just, like, timelines and kings and who killed who. And
I love whiteboards and corkboards. They just,
yeah.
that tactility,
Yeah.
the internet's great and having programs that can help you build is great, but there's just something about having a string and attaching it across the corkboard to follow the different plot lines that are happening and where they cross and where they don't cross. Love it.
Yeah.
I almost don't believe people who say they're entirely pantsers with their writing, because you have to have some idea of where you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to have a beginning. You must vaguely know what you want your character to achieve.
I can absolutely vouch for that one. I wrote Broken in 2 weeks, and I mean that is as close to pantsing as I came. I wrote 90,000 words in 2 weeks. I sat down and I wrote, but I had been plotting this thing out for 15, 20 years.
In your head.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call that well, are you a plotter or a pantster? I'm like, well, I wrote it on the fly like that, but it was not.
It was all in
It was not unplotted. It was very much plotted. I just didn't write it down.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100% on that one. That I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a beginning and an end, and I'll know the midpoints that I want to get my characters to get to, and I might wing it in between then a little bit, but there's always aiming to a goal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Say they're pantsing or aiming to some kind of goal in the end. If not initially, then very quickly in.
I've met several. They've never published. Just saying.
Yeah, because they always have to go back and revise it.
There's a group of writers, Sean Platt, Johnny B. Truant, and David Wright, and they've written a couple books, but the first one is Write, Publish, Repeat, and the second one, I think they have Fiction Unboxed, and they have Iterate and Optimize, and they're about to beta launch a app to do world building and make it not time consuming and difficult to keep track of, and I'm very excited because I need it.
I love the
That makes me
research.
sad. Yeah, that makes me sad.
Research.
But their whole thing about plotting versus pantsing is that the plotting allows you to write better faster.
That's it
Because
exactly, yeah.
you know what you're doing, and so when you're actually writing your first draft, it might take you years to get that outline and that backstory, but to actually write the book, once you have all of that done, can take you very little time. So you can
And you come up with such a more streamlined manuscript at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It saves on your revision.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And your characters still surprise you. I had a scene where my
yeah.
character was supposed to kill somebody, and instead he went to the bank.
Yeah.
It
I hate it when characters do whatever they want. I really do. I'm just like, I want you to do this. No, I'm going to do...
It ended up being important because, like, that's why he kills this particular person.
Yeah.
Hey, am I back?
Yes.
You are back, Mary.
Mary.
We're just about to wrap up. So.
Oh well, I guess I missed everything.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So thank you all for coming, and I learned a lot, and I reminded myself of a lot of things.
Maybe I'll have better luck next time.
Fingers crossed, Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what happens. It's just me and technology.
Well, that's all right.
Thank you for organising it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I had
Thank you.
tons of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll see
I
you
guess
just a little
look
bit
at everything
paranormal.
on YouTube
Yeah.
and see what everybody said.
So we
I'll
have
see you.
Heroine's Journey
Yeah.
as the next panel, and that's starting in about an hour. And then we have Paranormal and
Yeah, I'm gonna try
one today.
paranormal.
We have the
Try
domestic
to be
violence
on
awareness one.
paranormal.
The domestic
yeah, I'm
violence
on that
awareness
one
one that's
too.
going to be like part 2 of the memoir one.
Yep. That'll be a
Hello?
good one.
Hello?
So we have, oh, that's, okay, so tonight we have domestic violence awareness. Okay.
Yep.